Mr. Reed Summers. Hi, Reed. How are you this evening?
Hey, Rob. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Oh man, like I said, it's awesome having you here. Everyone knows here for the last few weeks I've been pumping this show up, saying we got Reed Summers coming. This is going to be a real important conversation to have. So everyone's been anticipating your arrival, and we finally got you here. So I'm just glad that we can go ahead and jump into the conversation. So I did want to start out, Reed. Obviously everyone has different paths when it comes to getting into this field and the reasons why they did. What I guess first led you into the world of ufology? Did you have anything growing up, any experiences, or kind of what directed your path here?
Yeah, long journey. Much of my life has indirectly or directly been involved in this phenomenon and all of the side phenomena associated with it. My family has been involved in the process of considering what the intent of non-human intelligence might be going back all the way to the 60s. My uncle was primary contractor working with George Van Tassel on the developments at Giant Rock in California. It's going way back into the legacy era. My mother was a spiritual practitioner of great depth, working with many spiritual teachers in her early years. And she felt called from the very beginning to explore the intersection between our human spiritual sensing ability, what you might call a noetic ability or a higher level of consciousness, and the ability to apply that to perceiving accurately the visitation by non-human entities in the form of an extraterrestrial visitor. And she would ultimately meet my father, who was an accomplished spiritual teacher and a receiver of telepathic information, Marshall Summers, who has received a pretty large body of work on this topic. And together, they would explore deeper, perhaps, than most folks you might ever meet, giving much of their adult lives, professional lives, to focusing on this. So I grew up in an environment where this was dinner table conversation. The likelihood of an extraterrestrial visitation was right there on the table for me to consider growing up from a very early age. Definitely had some anomalous encounter experiences, some sighting events in my life, which further kind of confirmed the reality behind this. And, my journey took me off into the world. I traveled extensively, lived in the Middle East for a time for work and study, was able to go to 40 different countries and for a variety of purposes, ultimately settled at a career at a national federally funded lab focused on atmospheric science here in Colorado, where I was for 12 years. And, I left last summer out of, honestly, this sense of something of a UFO calling, which I don't think is unique to me. I think many people are sensing that this is about to erupt into world consciousness to a greater degree than ever before through disclosure. And they are involved. They have to be, they have to be present for this ontological, philosophical, spiritual, and truly prosaic interface that we seem to be having with this phenomenon. So I felt called into that. And so I've been focusing a greater amount of my time and energy on this. And, I write and speak often. I'm working on a book on this topic and a number of other projects, which I hope to bring forward. So it's been a long road. But, basically my inspiration is I've been exposed to a lot of this multivaried, confusing, shape-shifting manifestation of the phenomenon associated with NHI. And I have found it necessary to develop grounded, logical ways of thinking through this phenomenon. How does one think through this with so much obfuscation, so much secrecy, so much deception by human and non-human actors? And what are the most important things to consider as you think through it? Like, what are the high points, the mile markers in this unknown landscape that we seem to be traversing? And over many years, I've developed through a framework I have, which basically, in the shortest way to describe it, is going from possibilities to probabilities to starting assessment, and then to a working conclusion. Well, my starting assessment, I like to give to people because I think it helps in their formation of an assessment. It kind of gives them a benchmark to square theirs up against, or to find theirs, different from. So can do that today as well.
Yes, awesome stuff there. So, okay, so looking into this, growing up with the family where it was totally into this is actually pretty awesome. I can only imagine what like the dinner conversations were like. But when you get into like your friends, right, at school, being that young and being so involved in the conversation, was this ever anything that you would talk to your friends about, or was the stigma just so strong that you shied away from it?
I definitely had those few conversations, those select moments, as I'm sure many of us have had with the receptive person. But no, I mean, growing up in middle class America, pre 9/11, those were the fat, dumb, and happy years of American prosperity and affluence, or affluenza, as we might call it. And so, no, there was not a lot of awareness on this topic. And of course, with every major UFO documentary going back to Into the Blue by James Fox, which was that was an event of the year back when that was released, right? So we're living in different times now, and I've had since, as I've really stepped into this more fully, I've had this conversation about who are they, what are they, why are they, what are the probable explanations for why they're here? How should we approach this field of vast possibilities and distill it down to some working probabilities that reflect what we can know about the universe, about species interaction, and about ourselves. I've had that conversation with hundreds and hundreds of people in almost every socioeconomic, cultural, political, religious setting I can imagine out in the world. And so I've enjoyed those conversations, thinking through this together. And I really feel that most people are in a much better position than we may think they are to have that conversation, to entertain the possibility of a non-human physical alien visitation and its implications for the human species. I don't know. I mean, my rough estimate would be 90% of the people I talk to can go there. And when they go there, they can think through it in a relatively grounded fashion. My concern is in the UFO community, the community of people who have taken the deep dive, the level of confusion and the dichotomies that have formed and that have kind of entrapped people's cognitive process and critical thinking abilities are profound. And so that says to me, someone is really trying to impede a logical conversation about this phenomenon, and is trying to kind of capture the audience of people who have the highest level of interest and need and calling even, and really prevent them from making progress in that cognitive process. So that's what I look forward to. And I've had those conversations with a lot of folks, and I look forward to more of it.
Yes, very important to have as well. So just kind of looking at this and starting out, because I don't like to only speak to an audience that are quote unquote UFO believers. I like to bring skeptics into the conversation too, at least the ones with the open minds, because I've always said there's within this field, on both sides of the conversation, you have a subset of people who are what you would consider extreme believers, who just will believe anything that you say and without questioning it or challenging it. Then you have, on the opposite side, skeptics that just are extreme skeptics and just don't want to believe. They believe in not believing, essentially. And
Right.
so, I like having those open-minded people come to the conversation. If you were to look back on some of UFO history and kind of point to maybe one or two events that, if you were going to speak to a skeptic to kind of show him, hey, there might be something more to this, it's something you could look into, what would be a couple of those sightings that you would point to?
Roswell, Phoenix Lights, Colaris, some of these incidents with numerous, in some cases, hundreds of corroborating witnesses, many of them highly credible, many of them government, military, law enforcement, with multiple photographic, video, or sensor data capture to back that up, and highly researched, thoroughly vetted numerous witnesses with testimony captured. So incidents like those, I think, suggest that, well, first off, the government in this country, the US government, has demonstrated, has come out very plainly to say, we are interested and concerned.
Yeah.
We do not know, and there is something here. I mean, this is former CIA directors, former directors of national intelligence. We have credentialed people with access to programs that would be involved, basically saying, yes, there is something there, and indicating that they are unable to get access to it, to know what's inside of those sealed, compartmentalized programs. And then, I mean, the list goes on. I mean, all the statements that have been made recently, obviously by Lou Elizondo, Dave Grush, former director of the CIA, Admiral Hillenkotter, Paul Hellyer, other major government officials, basically corroborating that there is a there. So in my view, what UFO research has substantiated over the past 80 years are a number of things. One is that we have a hard, observable, physical phenomenon taking place in our skies, on land, and in our oceans, which in all likelihood, much more probably than not, is of non-Earth origin. It is demonstrating capabilities well beyond those that any known state actor would have at that specific time in history, or in the last 100 years. So we have a hard physical phenomenon. We have not just objects that are transiting our atmosphere in linear pathways. We have craft that are under some form of control. And I would add intelligent control. They are adaptive, they are evasive, they are anticipatory, they interact with the human controller of, the craft in the sky, the sea, ship on the ground, or the individual in their bedroom at night. And so, going down from that hard physical surface level of the phenomena, if you take the analogy of the iceberg, right, there's what you can see at the surface, a little bit, there's what you can see in the subsurface. But then based upon those two, there's what you can infer exists well below the subsurface, what is really truly out of view for most of us. And that's what the deep of the phenomenon is, in my view, that we might infer is there. And based upon the way these craft are operating around civilian sites, military sites, nuclear assets, the way that crashed vehicles are being recovered, not just recovered because they were randomly fell out of the sky or were downed, but because they might have been intentionally placed on the ground for us to find. Some signal or some indication that agreements have been made with government to transact for technologies in exchange for what, right? And then we have this abduction phenomenon, this human NHI interface, which took off toward the end of the 20th century, and has, by all appearances, due to the corroborating nature of reports from people all around the world in almost every cultural setting, people with no media access, people reporting this well before, the craze and, of memes and so forth related to contact, reporting very similar entities, very similar encounters, procedures, craft. So that's the deep. I think we can begin to infer that there is a human abduction phenomenon. So I know I'm kind of going into the whole of it here, but those are some of the high points that I would highlight.
Well, and let me ask you this, Reed, because you mentioned a couple of those historic cases like the Roswell. And I would say with Roswell, they said in the beginning, their initial statement was, we have recovered a crashed disc. So that was the truth right there. They told you the truth. But, here's what I'm wondering, just from your perspective. Why do you think, with so much evidence out there that should really seal the deal, for a lot of people, they still question the evidence. They still can't wrap their mind around, wow, okay, let me be open-minded and consider the fact that this may have actually happened. Why do you think people are so, not willing to embrace the evidence?
Sure. I mean, multi-layered reason for that, multi-layered reality behind that. I ask folks a lot, what is your need to know about this phenomenon? And a lot of people raise their hand like, oh yeah, I need to know. Okay. What is your will to know? And I'll tell you, at that moment in the audience, some hands go down, and there's kind of a half gasp, half sigh in the room where people are like, I don't know if I want to know. Do I really want to know how deep this goes and how dark it might be?
Yeah.
And what this might ultimately represent for the human species? I'm not sure, right? And I respect that. I really do. But outside of the need to know audience and the will to know audience is the broad public who may not yet have a need to know. In fact, they may have a need to not know. And in part, that's because the paradigm in which they operate, in which they get up every day and reason through, the cost benefit analysis of their life, what they give over to their employer in exchange for happiness and fulfillment. And right, it's like everything that underlies that would be fundamentally changed by the realization of this event, that this event would precipitate for them. And that's earth shaking. I respect that. And that's why it is important to onboard people slowly, as has been happening, to this reality and avoid something of a mass panic event, which certainly could ensue, right? There are real societal implications of too much too soon, too far. But as for the evidence, I mean, I kind of view the argument for hard evidence as a soft argument, right? Because first off, who holds the evidence, right? Those are the keys. Those are the keys to public consciousness. Because hard evidence, which is literal bodies, body cam footage, actual pieces of metal, pieces of the interior of a craft, what that would do to the evidential requirements of the largest number of people is phenomenal, right? And who has such evidence that we all say we want so much, right? It's the very gatekeepers who we are in some sort of cold war with, it seems. And
Yeah.
so this demand for hard evidence places the power and the mechanisms to control the process of disclosure right back in the hands of the people who have it. And it also presumes that these powers, whatever they are, defense contractors, deep elements of three-letter agencies, are the ones who hold the answer to contact itself, the meaning. Who are they? What does it mean for us? What are we actually encountering? We assume they know. They could be very deluded. They could be very misled or misguided. They could be manipulated as well. And so we bang on the door of the Pentagon wanting these scraps of their interface with the phenomenon, when the truth is the phenomenon has been interfacing with individual human beings
Yes.
for probably almost 40 years or long, or well, probably the whole time. But I think the bulk evidence that would help us understand the intent of the visitor exists in the broader public. It definitely exists in the deeper state, deeper elements of this government, my government, other governments too, however. We shouldn't mistake this as USG and NHI. The NHI are, I think, interested in the world, the attributes of this planet, its resource attributes, and us as a species. So, but we might have a misplaced center of controversy if we think the US government is the one who has managed and manipulated this entirely. Because as we'll get into, I think there is a parallel secrecy and a parallel cover-up that originates with non-human actors.
Yes, we are going to get into that good stuff. And I'm actually, I'm one, and I'm just listening to you because I already, when I saw you on the interview, I'm like, yeah, he speaks the same language that I speak as far as this goes. And I always tell people here that there are two sides to this. There's a government controlled disclosure process that you can choose to waste your time with, or there's a humanity led disclosure, which is when I compare the two, I tell people, I'm like, we have pretty much all the evidence that they have minus the craft in the bodies, but we have actually everything else when it comes to that. So, I guess we can jump into, is we got about 1 minute here, 2 minutes before break. There had been, and I guess this will get into what you were just speaking about, but I just had Laura Eisenhower on the show a few weeks ago. Awesome lady. And obviously her great grandfather is President Dwight Eisenhower. And there was rumors that there were some sort of meetings that took place. She states that that's not true, but that doesn't mean that there weren't meetings with other government officials on other levels. What do you think about that aspect of it? And as we got about 45 seconds to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal indications that discussions have occurred, that interactions have taken place. If you want to touch a deep element to that, which has been corroborated to me personally by someone formerly high up in government who would know, is the account in Project Preserve Destiny. Last name of the author is Sherman. And so basically the preparation of intuitive communicators by the NSA to facilitate the abduction program as orchestrated by the non-human intelligence. Read that book. If that's true, wow. Tell me there's not been an agreement. Oh, there's much more than an agreement. There's been a collaboration. But the question is who's marching to whose beat? We assume that the government is the actor, the bad actor, and the NHR are the neutral, or maybe even the beneficials who are being kept at bay from us being able to access them. I would challenge that assumption. And I do not think there is enough in the observed record to substantiate it.
Well, that's great because we're going to actually be jumping into that right after this break. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's great that we're able to have these conversations because we'll never get the direct information from the government. So it's kind of cool to be able to put forth theories and kind of think through, just like you stated, have a process where you kind of just run down a rabbit hole and see what the outcome of that is. But we'll be coming right back, guys. You don't go anywhere with Reed Summers as we talk about alien intent. Why are they here? What are they doing? What's the purpose? What's next? We're going to get into that. You guys don't go anywhere. Stay tuned right here on Spaced Out Radio. All right. Awesome. We are clear. Reed. Yeah. So how you been, man? Like I said, I saw you. I'm like, Reed is talking my language, man. Reed is really on. He's got his finger on the pulse as far as how to think through this. Because I always tell people, I'm like, common sense. I think the common sense we've been given is enough to figure this thing out. I think that's the tool, not any academic accolades or any of that. It's your human given common sense.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, that's what I do is I think through this and I talk to other people as they think through this. And I think I totally agree. We are endowed with a broader set of capabilities. We are the human intelligence, let's not forget, the HI in this NHI-HI interface. And so lest we fork over all of that natural authority in the entity encounter over to government and academia and elsewhere, it's like, hold on a second. We are the human species, each individual. There's the species is somewhat conceptual, right? We all vary slightly genetically, obviously in our physiology and else in other ways. And so but who's human but us? And so if this is an encounter between us and them, I think we need to place it in our own hands to perceive it and to engage with it with our full suite of capabilities, one of which is we do have this thing called common sense. We also have this thing called instinct, right? All animals have instinct related to their environment and the entities in their environment. If NHI has been here for 100 years, I wouldn't doubt that many people have an instinctual and intuitive sense that they are here and a sense for what they are and for what this means. And so this is our deeper sensing, but I think there's more superficial sensing like logic, reason, caution, what we can observe with our five senses. Also very important. That's the human sensor.
Yes. And it's so obvious with like the different projects that the government has was it like Project Stargate and other things like that where you can obviously see that the government understands that our senses have been suppressed, that they're suppressing them, and that we have way more that we can actually do with these senses. It isn't just the 5 senses that we know of. There's probably 10 senses, maybe more than that we have. And if we realized that we had, a lot of people wouldn't have to think so much or doubt some of the things we're being presented with. It make more sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. The whole seemingly obsession of government, former government people, is indicative that deeper elements of the human psyche and their ability to interface with these entities, telepathically possibly, is a built-in capability. And guess who has it? All of us, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, in my mind, this is a meeting of minds. This is an entity encounter. And whenever you encounter another entity, take another human. That's a sentient life form that we've researched thoroughly and understand to a pretty high degree. How do you discern the intent of that entity for the purpose of your own response? Because again, the project, in my view, is we have to discern the entity of the visitors for the purpose of mounting a timely and necessary human response to their visitation in a collective fashion. So in my mind, I mean, we all can find our niche interest in this phenomenon or dive as deep as we think we want to go. But back up on the surface of mainstream life exists the bulk of humanity, right? And so ultimately, some majority globally, hopefully, is going to have to mount some response to this global visitation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So how do you discern the intent of another entity? Well, oftentimes you talk with them, you engage with them, you look at them. Well, the entities in question here are secretive. They're operating in covert fashion. They are operating in a long-standing state of non-disclosure. And so this is going to take something more like a decoding effort. How do you decode this intent? Because the entities are not going to prefer their intent to us, it doesn't seem. And even if they did at this stage, I mean, after 80 or 100 years of covert operation, they come in at the last moment and say, oh, we're here. Craft over every city. Here's what we're here to do. Here's some technology to heal the climate crisis. I would be very leery of that as well, with some understanding of the breadth of this presence in the world.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is kind of the project as I view it. And there's ways that we and everyone, the common person, can begin to think through this and come to a probabilistic statement about the intent of the visitor.
And that's what we're doing tonight. The theme here is conversations that move the needle, because I think so many we waste so much time on parts of this we really don't need to be discussing. We need to be discussing things like this and things that actually answer questions, right? So we got about 10 seconds here before we come back from radio.
Nice.
Radio. Okay. All right, everybody, welcome back to Spaced Out Radio, the After Hours radio show. We're on the back half of hour one as we are joined back with our guest, Reed Summers, and we're talking alien intent. We're about to get deep now. It's about to go deep. So you guys kick back, get ready for the conversation. And also, to all you space travelers out there, we're on a rock traveling through space as we speak. Think about taking the next step and joining the club. You can join our Spaced Out Radio Space Travelers Club for as little as $5 a month by joining our Patreon as we go ahead and get back in the conversation with Reed Summers. So let's start taking the turn, Reed. So okay, we're looking back. We're looking back on the initial, what we think is the initial current contact, which we're considering Roswell, and maybe even right before that, Gress talks about the Italy ET or craft that was captured. So, okay, what do you think happened in that scenario? Do you think there was an actual interface with human beings and ET? Do you think there were any messages delivered at that time, ultimatums maybe given back in the beginning, or what is your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it might be good to kind of end up there. The communication history is probably the most speculative part of what we can discern. Who said what to who and when. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's likely that messages were attempted to be sent. It's tricky. We're a world of 192 countries, right? And we're a multipolar world in terms of superpowers competing adversarially. So who do you speak to? In what order, right? And if you have something to offer, who gets it first? Who markets it? Who gets it? Who patents it? Who gets it to which university? Who writes the study on it? We're a world, ripe for division internally over extraterrestrial promises of salvation or trinkets from space, whatever might come our way. So, it's a tricky world to engage. If I was a non-human entity, I would look down at this place and think twice about engaging. Maybe I'd send some encouragement for them to get their act together to resolve some of their crises and conflicts. But how do you engage this world for human benefit? It's a lot trickier once we start to think through that. And I think basically, looking at the surface level of the phenomenon beyond the physical hard nature, craft in the sky and the ocean, and then going deeper, noting that comments have been made about biologics. Well, biological means what? It means this entity might have arisen in a naturalistic universe, in a Darwinian type scenario, right, where they emerged in some planetary system, possibly in space. Maybe they were bred or created, and yet they are still in this bid for survival, replication, and that requires some environment and some resource. And the universe is a scarce place for such things, unless maybe you've achieved such heights that you can harvest, energy from black matter or something. But if these are biological entities piloting physical craft with real demonstrated capabilities far exceeding our own, we have to start to kind of frame how we think about it in that way. I think we should think of it as entities that are arising in a naturalistic setting, with some sort of need for environment and resource. I think that is a logical way to start to think about it. And in all my work, we talk about process. I think process is important because we're inside of a process, whether we know it or not. We're ingesting information. It's like Tetris, right? These little blocks are trying to sort into our brain cavity and into our, into whatever inherent logic we have. And so it's good to just take note of the process we're in. And I think there's a natural process of going from impossibility to possibility, which is your mind expands to allow for numerous possibilities that the universe may throw our way. And then you start to look at the phenomenon and you encounter aspects of it that really are beyond contest at this point. Like I've mentioned, that physicality. Is it possible there's non-corporeal or extra-dimensional or extra-temporal aspects to it? Of course that's possible. But what we know is that they're physical craft, piloted intelligently. And what we're starting to know is that there's a biological element and a human interface that's long-standing. So that right there just takes you from possibilities to probabilities. Yeah. And then, my thing is, I think those who focus on this, it is important to arrive at a place where you can make a starting assessment, which is not a conclusion. It's basically to say, based on what I can know and what I have in hand, I would assess it this way. And with that assessment, I would go focus my inquiry further. I would possibly go look at better evidence that would either substantiate or negate my assessment. And I would either prove it right or disprove it and reformulate it. But this inability to assess, it's almost like ufology is allergic to anything that sounds like a conclusive statement. We just got to back our way into possibilities again, back up into possibilities. We just got to expand. We got to expand. I think this is part of the obfuscation. Someone does not want people to come to any solid determination, because once they do that, then they can act. That marshals their energies and allows them to work with other human beings toward resolving what the assessment might indicate. So,
yeah, I like that. So I like looking at the probability part. Okay, these things we know are on physical craft, and they have been listed to have been biological entities. So we do definitely know those things. And so I guess that goes into a lot of people that look at this and they say, we shouldn't put our humanly intentions on and kind of put those on ETs as if they would experience right or wrong or war or peace. Right. But I think it's like pretty logical to kind of go down that path, and I guess that would lean into, when for those of us who haven't had a direct interface with the extraterrestrial, we depend on our stories from our experiencers who state that they have. And so a lot of those cases, I want to say probably 90%, those people have talked about having great experiences. The ETs have told them that they're here to fix this, and they want to see us ascend. But then you have Lou Elizondo or someone from within the government, David Grush even, who have talked about Lou saying somber and using that word, which that always has stuck with me. And I still want to know. I want to talk to Lou and ask him, like, really, what did he mean by that? And then you have David Grush, who has admitted that there have been instances where people have died at the hands of ETs, whether accidentally or on purpose. So when you look at that, how how do you go down the thought process of trying to figure out what you should be believing in, or should you just be aware of both things being possible?
Right. Great questions. So I want to kind of start off by calling out some of these imposed barriers to critical thinking that I run into all the time. And these are like automatic refrains. We start to talk about intent, needing to understand what they want so we can respond to it. I hear this all the time. Because they are not attacking us, they must be here to help us. Because if they wanted the world, they would have taken it already. If they wanted to destroy us, they could, which is kind of a haunting thing, because it's like, wow, so we're admitting that this could be a threat, profound existential threat, but they're just not choosing to, right?
Mhm.
But as a result of those A, B, yes, no, kind of, they're kind of like false dichotomies, right? Well, if not this, then it must be that. If they're not here to hurt, they must be here to help. There's a wide spectrum of possibilities in between, and we are in no way at a point where we can resolve the potential of a threat and sign on collectively with a possible beneficial visitation. I mean, there's not a lot in the collectively observable record, if not nothing, that suggests beneficial intent. And Lou came out and said that in his book. It's not to say it suggests detrimental intent or hostile intent, but it does not suggest beneficial intent. When you look at what these craft have done around nuclear sites, for example, when you look at the abduction phenomenon, which is 90% positive, would most certainly not be an accurate representation of the distribution of experience among abductees. And also, of course, those who have positive experiences are more likely to report them than those who feel profoundly violated and damaged by the interaction. So unfortunately, solid research that is credible has not been done. And so we can't lean on this while most experiencers say it's good. So, I mean, I know a lot of experiencers do say that. But there are these kind of cognitive barriers, which these refrains. And so, I would respond to some of these, like, if they're not attacking us, they must be here to help us. As if humanistic violence is the one variable by which we can reverse decode intent. They're good because they're not attacking us. Well, maybe they are aggressive, they're just hyper intelligent. And they're doing it on a time scale or in a way, for example, psychically or genetically, that we would not know how to do. Okay, so like just because there's not bombs and bullets flying around does not mean this is good, right? That's obvious. But many, many people have resolved that question with that one assumption. And so I think that assumption is dead on delivery, frankly. And we need to move beyond that kind of thing. If they wanted the world, they would have taken it already. Maybe they do want the world, and maybe they're taking it over 500 years.
Yeah.
Maybe we are part of the world that they want, the natively adapted apex species who has built a world civilization capable of extracting biological resources, mineral resources, on a scale never before since starting in the 20th century, which, by the way, when did they show up? The 20th century. I think a lot of indication as to why they're here can be discovered. Again, these are probability statements. These are not statements of absolute certainty. And my whole thing is we need to get down the road of assessment to conclusion with iteration, which is to say, you take new evidence in. And once you assess, you take new evidence in. You assess, you take new evidence in, and you iterate forward to more conclusive statements of certainty. I don't think we are at a point of being able collectively to assert something conclusively, but I think we are at a point where we can state something probabilistically. And so, yeah, when you look at, when NHI came, how they came, it's a 20th century event, very distinct. Well, what else happened in the 20th century, right? Unprecedented century in the history of the planet and the people, the human species. And I frankly think it's highly likely and logical that they're here for one of two things, or both. They're here for the planet, or they're here for us. What else is here? And this planet, we can already make statements about the rarity of terrestrial Earth-like worlds, such as our own. They're more rare than common. And what happened in the 20th century? Well, we started to destroy it and threaten its habitability with nuclear weapons, right? So, and who shows up? So I think this begins to kind of narrow how we might be thinking at this moment, at least, about what we can see.
Yeah, and I like the whole time aspect there, right? Because time may not their time frame may not equate to what we consider is time as well, right? So
Right.
100 years for us could be a day for them. and maybe this is happening over a 15-day period for them, which would be 1,500 years from us. So we would never see the
Right.
actual intent of what they're doing. But then also, yeah, like you stated as well, like they're here, maybe we're part of what they want as well. And I guess you could kind of almost look at that, right, as like a swarm of killer bees who are deadly,
Hmm.
but we keep them around because they're able to produce honey, right? And they're able to do this natural thing that we can't do on our own. So we keep them
Yeah.
around. And yeah, maybe that, so that kind of goes into the whole zoo thing that a lot of people talk about. Now, here's the other part of this. Like, when I bring up the experiencer, because, you're going to have people out there, I'm sure, maybe even in the chat, that are like, hey, no, I know why they're here. They've told me directly that this is the reason why they're here and this is what their intent is. But then I always say to that okay, even if we took that at face value, if we're like, okay, these things are literally telling you this, how do you know there's no deception in play there, as
Sure.
far as what their intent is? Like, why wouldn't you think that? What makes you trust these things to a point to where you're going to take their words at face value? And
Hmm.
so those are some of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about why they are here.
Yeah.
And we also see them setting up and potentially setting up bases underwater. What do you think that's about? Because I'll tell you real quick, I had a sighting where in the middle of the day, I guess these things are called flotillas when they're in a huge group. I had 47 objects in the middle of the day that flew right overhead, and they were in like a formation like you would see militarily, right? um they didn't do anything bad that I know of, at least, right? And but when you look at things like that and then you start to
Mhm.
think about intent, it's like, well, why would they be in a formation? Why would they be grouped together in that way?
Right.
Have you looked at any of that? And then what is your outlook on situations like that?
Hmm. Well, regarding alien bases, I think we need to go beyond considering this as a visitation and start thinking of it as an intervention. Now, there can be many types of intervention: good, good according to their intent, good according to what they think would be our intent, and detrimental. But they are involved in the world. This is not a remote observation or simply a detection scenario, I don't think, at this point. When you look at the number of craft, the number of sightings, estimates of possibly 50,000 good sightings a year globally, that is a pervasive phenomenon. Numerically significant. Just think of the infrastructure that might be positioned in our solar system or on the dark side of our moon, which we are in geostationary lock with, right? So what a perfect beachhead or grounds for operation. And of course, we as human beings, we're divided, we're distracted, we're embroiled in our conflicts. We could care less. But going back to your former question about evidence, it's like evidence comes out, statements are made, and the world glances up from their morning cereal and more or less, looks back down to the newspaper. So, we're very vulnerable as a species, and we are sitting on top of a world which might be of value. Rarity might confer value in the universe. And I would wager that value brings visitation and that destruction of value brings intervention. And we are altering fundamentally the habitability of this planet. And we are destroying its biodiversity at a record rate. We're causing a sixth mass extinction. So I think it's appropriate to see this as an involvement, an incursion into the world. Now, for what purpose? That's the question, right? So, I kind of have multiple ways of looking at it. One is the behavioral observation. That's in an intel world. What they might do is like, well, let's start with what we can observe in their behavior. What do they say? What do they do? Who do they interact with? There are signs there. It's not scatter. It's a scatter plot, but we could draw a line through that seemingly random series of dots, and begin to think of it in a specific way. For example, the non-human intelligence has seemed willing to interact with and transact with multiple foreign adversaries. I do not, to my knowledge, know of an attempt to reach global governing bodies like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, right? The World Trade Organization. So to me, they know. We have to assume that they know everything about us. They could have been observing us for 1,000 years or longer or shorter. We have been transmitting our species data set into space ever since the invention of radio transmission technologies. They have our data. They've run it through their own equivalent technology to AI. They know. They know us better than we know ourselves, probably. We should responsibly assume that.
Right.
And so they know what makes us tick. They know what our evidential requirements are and what leads to conviction, what leads to confusion. And I think that could easily be played against us. We're extraordinarily vulnerable. And so that there are craft in this numerical, in this number, and that there are underwater movements, facilities, there are craft going 400 or 500 knots that are the size of a football field, that are multiple sizes larger than a nuclear submarine. Why would you need a craft that large?
Right.
It's to operate a program. This is a programmatic involvement in the world. This is not a scouting mission. They're not taking photos and leaving. Okay, it's something more, it could be more akin to a habitation, not a visitation. And so the size of the craft, the number of them, their fixation with water, which yes, could be for multiple reasons, but one, it's a great place to hide. Because it happens to be that on planet Earth, we have great detection abilities, except in one place, under the ocean. We know almost as much about the ocean as we know about our own moon. So, again, species vulnerability. And I sometimes wonder if, like, this is like a built-in evolutionary handicap that, an emerging world of divided tribes, nations, what have you, starts to gain the technological ability to master their environment, to change their world fundamentally, and to project themselves beyond their world. And it is at that time that others see, detect, observe, study, analyze, and then intervene in order to change or alter the course of that species development. And yet, here's the hard thing. We are in their paradigm, probably. They saw us. They mounted a visitation. They intended to come. They're not in our paradigm. And so 80 years goes by. We collect all this evidence, this data about UFOs, and we are still in no greater position to do anything about it than we were in 1947. And that's a problem. Like, there is urgency and consequence built into species interaction, especially if there are evolutionary forces at play.
Do you think that, as we got about 4 minutes till we go to our top of the hour break, do you think that at any point in time, not just our government, but any power that be around the world have actually maybe observed the capabilities of these things on a malevolent level, like maybe shooting down a plane or just some sort of conflictual sort of thing that might just show, okay, we have this force here, we have these muscles here?
I have come across information that I find credible that would suggest, yes, that there is a quiet hot war going on between multiple governments and multiple hostile NHI. And, if true, that's alarming. And that, we might think twice before we incriminate our own government, if they are in some sort of bid to gain technological parity with these forces, to overturn whatever agreements or dynamics in the engagement have allowed these craft and their entities to operate freely in the human space, to potentially cause serious threats to public harm, and to resist those specific forces. I mean, that's if that scenario is true, that changes how you might think about all this. And for me, I'm not in. The urgency and the consequence factor are significant in my view. And 80 years have gone by. We have to get somewhere. We have to get down the road with this. I don't think we can understand or comprehend fully the visitation taking place, the number, the morphology, the taxonomy that we might draft, to reflect it. It could be way more complex than we think. It could also be simpler than we think. But these are fundamentally non-human entities, right? So to get inside their head, to understand their world, which is the network of interactions that they have with forces who are not here, which most certainly exists. They most certainly have their own exosystem. We have an ecosystem. They have an exosystem. We don't understand the exosystem. And I don't think we will on a necessary timeline for our response. And so for me, it's not about ruling everything in. the interdimensional potential, the cryptoterrestrial potential, right? The biblical or scriptural potential, right? I don't think we can rule all of that in now, but what we do need to rule in is whether there is a physical alien visitor. Those three words. Are they physical? Are they alien, meaning not us? And are they a visitor, which means they're not from here? Because if that's true, that is significant. That we should be thinking in the context of evolution and species interaction.
Okay.
Because it's, yeah.
As we got about a minute to go to break, just real quick, because I wanted to heavily talk about this hot war on the other side of the break. But I asked a guest, and I've asked many guests, what do you think is going on here? If you had to choose one of these words, would you say alien invasion, alien visitation, or alien occupation? Which one of those would you go with?
I would not go with any of those three myself. I would go with something closer to an intervention or an integration or a colonization. Occupation doesn't really suggest intent. Occupation could be for many different reasons. It could be, it could be out of the best good-hearted will in the universe. But I think we need to...
Let's stop right there. And we're going to come back on the other side of the break with Reed Summers here, getting deep into the alien intent. You guys don't go anywhere. Stay right there.
Conversations that move the needle.
Conversations that move the needle.
You're listening to After Hours with Mr. Robb G on the only place where you can own the night. Spaced Out Radio.
Spaced Out Radio.
You've tuned your dial to the right frequency.
All right, we're clear. We're off camera now for 5 minutes. Reed, I'll play a video.
Okay.
You'll see you in a minute. Yes, everyone. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio after hour number 2. So we're back with our guest, Reed Summers, talking to Alien Intent. We got about 30 seconds before we come back to radio. You guys, I got some of your questions already. Definitely keep them coming, and we'll pose those in the last half of hour 2 as we get ready to go. Yeah, I like the intervention thing, Reed. I'm wrapping my mind around that concept. I think it's pretty cool way to look at it.
Mhm.
All right, here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back to Spaced Out Radio after hour number 2. As we go ahead and jump back into the conversation of Alien Intent. Why are they here? We're kind of spitballing, talking our way through this thing, looking at the most logical reasons why they're here. Guys, don't forget, you can follow us at any time over there on X and Instagram at Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Radio Show. We'd appreciate a follow if you wouldn't mind, as we go ahead and get back into the show and get back with Reed Summers here. So, Reed, you were talking before the break about, you have reason to believe that there's some sort of hot war is what you called it, like a covert war against maybe some of the powers that be in this world and extraterrestrials. Are you able to go into detail maybe on some of the things that may have happened, or what can you let us know?
Not really. No, I don't have great insight into the specific, locales, what was taken down by who, to what end. But I think it makes sense that if NHI have been not in visitation but in intervention or in a programmatic incursion into our world, with working with or interfacing with multiple foreign powers, that has affected events on the ground, maybe more than we think. It's a kind of a profound question to ask, which is, if the events of the 20th century had not happened, World War II, detonation of nuclear weapons, environmental destruction, the technological strides we've made, would they be here? If we were still living in something like the late stage 19th century, would they be here? Not so sure. And inversely, if they had not shown up at all, would we have a different world today? Would the secrecy apparatus be what it is? Would the state of global tensions be what they are? Which, of course, is somewhat surrounding the secrecy apparatus, right? I mean, alien technology and science would be such a unbelievable powerhouse, financially, politically, geopolitically. It's enough to like distort human affairs in profound ways. And so that we now have some confirmation such technologies have been at least recovered and reverse engineered, I think we could make a probability statement there that has affected the state of geopolitical affairs in the world. Now, is NHI completely neutral and oblivious to this? Was it a total mistake on their part? I don't know about that. I don't think that's highly plausible. I think, again, they know us. They know what makes us tick, and they know what they're doing, flying over our cities at low speed, right? Several hundred feet above multiple onlookers with multiple cameras watching. They know what they're doing. And I think some of these sightings are shows of presence. I think they're shows of capability, and in some cases, a show of force. And so it's an involvement, and it's affected things. Now, this is part of the problem with making the assumption that they're here to help. They're here to support humanity in our hour of need. They're here to give us things that we could not gain ourselves. All very reasonable desires. We all want to benefit in life and be supported and loved by. We want to see the universe as a loving place, not a malevolent place. And I get that. I don't think we need to see it the opposite of that at all. I just think we need to see it pragmatically and as a naturalistic environment. And so if an entity, we can do a thought experiment together. If an entity came and they saw the state of affairs on Earth, they wanted to help, literally the world, how would they do that? Right? So post-World War II, America's the victor. Who do they engage with? Well, probably the United States, right? How does the USSR feel about that? Do they do that equally? Do they engage both simultaneously, same fashion, making the exact same offers? Tricky, right? Because look what humans would do with whatever was given. And so when you run this thought experiment of how a beneficial form of life would benefit humanity and human interests, it's a little bit trickier than most people think, right? And, I think that's one thought experiment. The other is, what if an entity were in our space, not with malevolence, because again, I really don't think the benevolent, malevolent, or the evil word is necessary at all. I think let's talk self-interest, self-interested NHI. Let's talk disinterested NHI. Just like you walk past an anthill on a hike, in 1 second, you could crush their world and eliminate most of their kind. Are you malevolent? Are you evil? More disinterested. Maybe you're a little devious, right? But you're not fundamentally corrupt. I don't think we need to make assessments of their fundamental quality of being. I think we need to make assessments of the impact their presence is having on human interests. So where beneficial, detrimental, instead of benevolent, malevolent, I think is much more useful. And I think we can begin to, and I hope in the coming several years, as disclosure rolls and more whistleblowers come forth with further indications of the degree of penetration NHI have had into our government and even outside of our governments and internationally, I think we will be able to understand a little bit better whether this has been had a beneficial effect or a detrimental effect on the state of affairs on Earth.
Okay, and what do you think is the reason that the governments won't be forthcoming with evidence? A lot of people think it's because they don't want to scare the planet, the citizens. Some people say it's because they just want to harness the technology and try to keep that a secret from other nations. What do you think is the main reason that the government won't be straight up with the public?
A number of reasons. Some of them we might find reasonable or understandable, at least. Some of them I think we can identify as not reasonable, not just. But the first is, and I think this is very important to call out, I think that there is a bad actor in our world. There is one or more detrimental NHI present in our world. And so if such a force is present with technological ability that far surpasses any government's ability to match or to impede or even to monitor, how do you tell your public about that? The citizen government contract is one of, we pay our taxes and you provide us the basic services and maintain freedom and enshrine the rights to happiness and so forth. The Constitution. So if there's a force that is fundamentally disregarding the constitutional responsibilities of government and impeding its ability to carry them forward, how do you disclose that? Yeah. That's a problem. And furthermore, that bad actor, if they're willing to do things to you, they're probably willing to do things to others, to other allied nations, or do things with other adversarial nations in opposition to you. And I think it's a little bit more complex, in fact, way more complex than we think in terms of what's really going on under the skin between Russia, China, and the United States and their respective spheres of influence and allied players that kind of, that back them up. So do we have a bad actor in the world? If so, that's one reason for non-disclosure. Second, has there been collusion between government, right? Is there culpability in what that bad actor has perpetrated against human populations? Has government participated? Have they benefited, right? Wow, that's a reason for non-disclosure. Have they extracted things of side value and made a lot of money? And or tilted the balance of power in the world, because the balance of power in the world is and has been post-World War II one of a prevailing Western liberal democratic order that is at least presiding generally over the rules-based systems of planet Earth at this time. Was that propped up by an NHI? Was technology or power gained that enabled that? That's controversial. How's that going to make other adversaries in the world feel? So, there are a lot of reasons for non-disclosure. I have my own theories as to what is really going on with disclosure, and they are theoretical. So I, of course, like everyone, we have to speculate, with an absence of evidence and such phenomenal obfuscation, one must do what one can do. But yes, I have some theories as to what is going on, which we can get into. But I think, again, we have to place at least some, if not a majority of the controversy on the non-human visitor. And we have to account for what they could be doing in the technological space, the scientific space, what they might be doing genetically with the human species. I mean, these are vectors of penetration into the human world, and it could be for many different reasons. And to some degree, we can decode intent generally, probabilistically, for the purpose of our human response. But to some degree, we have to admit that we cannot fully decode intent. And so we have to retreat to this line. Well, we don't know what they are fully. We don't know why they're here fully. We don't know their exosystem or their the larger network that propels their being here. So what do we do? Well, we need to do what we need to do anyway. We need to become a coherent species with the sufficient unity to voice our intent in the universe, to articulate our rules of engagement, and to delineate our domains of sovereignty. We, I think, need to be a sovereign species to a degree, and we need to exert that sovereignty and not simply abdicate it based on a whim and a hope that, well, they're more advanced than us, they're technological, they've eclipsed the need for war, they can travel the stars, they're better than us, and look at us. And I see people in this kind of like pit of an anti-human bent, and which is like, give over the world, give it to them. They're better than us. We're corrupt. We're an infectious species anyway. They probably own the world. It's probably their world in the beginning. They probably authored us, our religions, our scriptures. Man, we are just dumping the bags of coins at the feet of an entity whose face we have never seen, right? And why are we doing that? I don't understand why we're doing that. We're not thinking like human beings. We're not thinking like the native peoples on the turf that is our turf, interfacing intelligently with a visitor. And there are examples in at least the historical record of this sentient species, the human species, that we have studied thoroughly to suggest what happens when the less advanced species, when the less advanced force makes first contact with the more advanced force. It rarely goes well for the less advanced. And that's not always because the more advanced has a malicious intent, right? There are threats to the less advanced that are inherent in the interaction. Even if the more advanced has a beneficial intent, it could still play out very poorly for the other party in the matter. So, this is, to my mind, grounded thinking, and it's cautious, it's responsible, it's aware that risk is non-zero, period. I would invite anyone to argue with me on that. Risk is 100% non-zero. I think risk is actually extraordinarily high, given the unknowns, the vulnerabilities, and the consequences of those unknowns acting upon those vulnerabilities. So with risk, non-zero at least, we have to be thinking this way. If we say, no, we don't need to be thinking this way, or what I often hear is, Reed, this is fearful. You're being fearful right now. You need to be loving. You need to, the way you think and what you want will invite in from the universe equal forces to that. It will, law of attraction, right? It's like, wow.
Yeah.
I've heard that's about as low on the totem pole as you can get in terms of a high risk native response to first contact.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, non-zero is a great way to put it. And it's probably roughly around 50-50, really, because if we don't understand either side, it's got to be even split there. But what would be some of the, how, with that mindset, because it blows my mind when I talk to certain people and they lean on the non-threat narrative, no threat narrative. And I'm like, okay, so, when you go on a trip, and you pack responsibly, even though it's going to be warm weather there, you bring a coat in case it's cold at night. It might not be, but it'd be weird to not have a coat and it's cold and you could have brought a coat, right? So with that whole theory there, what would be some of the ways that you would say humanity should be preparing themselves just to be ready for both sides of this conversation?
Sure. Great question. Well, that's a whole conversation. I'm not sure we have total time to get into it now. There's kind of the collective action, the individual personal action, and then maybe the preparatory action in preparation for both. I think it is important to account for risk. Here's a simple equation: risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequence. Well, vulnerability and consequence we can almost resolve. High. What's threat? Well, threat is also a simple equation. Threat equals capability times intent, right? And so capability is extraordinarily high. And so it all comes down to intent. And that is my selected word and selected focus for this very reason, is we have to make some starting assessment of what intent is more probably than less probably. It's a probability statement.
Yeah.
And once we make that, at least as I've made it, I come to an assessment that this is an intervention. It's programmatic, and there seems to be some attempt to alter our species' direction psychologically, genetically, and you could say politically or geopolitically, if you want to go international. And so with that assessment, what do? Well, first off, you go and collect the evidence that would substantiate that at the highest point of impact. What is the highest point of impact that NHI are having in our world? It's the abduction phenomenon. It's the potential of a public safety hazard in people being removed from their homes, experimented upon, having forced impregnation or other violations to their personal sovereignty take place, with potential genetic outcomes, including and not limited to the creation of a parallel entity, a human hybrid individual. If that is taking place, that then predisposes the action pathway very specifically. I think what is needed now in ufology is to uncover that. Now, I know that's coming out more now. There's more talk of implants. There's more talk of abductions. There's more talk of people being harmed by UAP, which of course could be a side effect of the technology or being too proximal to it, but also people being harmed or killed by non-human intelligence. So we need to go right to that point of the highest penetration with the highest impact to public safety and either rule it in or rule it out. And that right there is going to set up the international conversation on what to do. And, I'll leave it there. We could definitely dive deeper into courses of action, but I don't know if you want to stay kind of more backed out and be looking at more of the scenarios of the NHI intent.
Yeah, because obviously there's so many places that could go, and we can definitely readdress that at some point down the line. But let me ask you this: does Reed, with the information that Reed has, when Reed goes out into the world, are you more cautious just at decisions and knowing that these things are out there and knowing that we are still trying to figure out the intent?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think twice about certain things or doing certain things because of the risk of exposing yourself to something or situation? Because the reason why I ask that is because I think that I think people should know that things are here and just be aware that, you could run into something truthfully at any time. A lot of people are seeing things right over their homes. Like if you choose to take this back road, like I drive through the desert, for instance, I'll go from Las Vegas to Reno, then it's hundreds of miles of desert. You're the only one on the road, right? So do you make a decision to do that with knowing the things that you know or having the outlook that you have?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you come to understand that there is a detrimental set of NHI in the world, that there is an oppositional stance being taken toward them by certain governments, that there is some degree of a hot war, and certainly a cold war, and that the NHI are focused on individuals with psychic abilities, that they are likely engaged in abduction of people. That definitely changes how you see the world. I don't walk around in a fearful state about it. Unfortunately, the more I talk about this, the more hostile forms of resistance get levied at me, which is concerning. Like, why? Why is this so threatening? This conversation we're having, to me, this should be happening on a CNN town hall. This should be happening on Russian RT. this should be happening on, in state-run TV in China. I don't know. This is not a threatening conversation, right? To talk about the possibility of threat, because threat is real in life. Threat is not just what they intend to do that is malicious. Threats can ensue accidentally from the interaction. Threats can be from within, not from without. To not talk about threat is to be willfully negligent and willfully selective in how one engages with the phenomenon. And that doesn't make sense to me unless one is being influenced or is part of some sort of narrative manipulation campaign, some propaganda effort to tell the world that there's something hyper positive and we all need to sign on with it now. Some galactic federation now. I have a simple rubric I'll share real quick regarding, extraterrestrial communications. And 4 parts, a bunch of red flags, a bunch of green flags, but basically, is it verifiable? Can this communication and its claims be verified by observed phenomenon? Because the moment we throw out observed phenomenon to sign on with an extraterrestrial communication, we are sacrificing one of our core capabilities, the 5 senses, the human sensor. So it's not that we need to be able to observe everything they say, but if what they say runs counter to what we can observe, and we're being asked, invited, or even gaslighted into demeaning our own capabilities and signing on with a hyper-intelligent set of capabilities, that's a flag to me. So verification, plausibility. Is their message plausible? If not, at the minimum, they didn't do the effort to think about their communication in ways that would win human hearts and minds. Ouch, oops. On the worst side of the spectrum, they're asking us to abandon really the traditions of our indigenous science, culture, and religion to sign on with something non-human. So plausibility is important. If you're going to get any collective humanity to act or respond, it should be plausible. And there's a lot of alien messages that are not plausible. And then last 2, power and action. Who gets the power in this dynamic? Are we basically signing on with a federation and we're junior partner, right? Are we giving access to our world? I mean, where does the power go? And then last, what's the call to action? What are they asking for? A lot of these alien communications, they have a pretty profound ask. Some of them even go so far as to say, which, man, this is red flag on all 4 of these, that you made a soul contract to be taken, to be abducted as part of a human upgrade project. But you are not at a vibrational level of consciousness sufficient to recall that contract and to embrace it, which is why you're afraid. Your fear is a sign of your lower intelligence. You need to open up to higher intelligence. Wow. If you hear that, raise the red flag as high as you can raise it, up the totem pole, because that is gaslighting, that is implausible. It is not backed by the verified phenomenon, and the power dynamic. My goodness, you are basically entering a master subservient relationship with those entities. And I hear this, and why am I hearing this? Why is this being promoted to tens or hundreds of thousands of people right now? I would have to say that there is an effort to manipulate human perception of the visitor, to acclimate us to it, to make it cool, novel, and even conscious or a higher consciousness to entertain their role in our lives today. I think there is an effort to write them into our origin stories and our scriptures. There's also a natural human need to understand our origins and our scriptures, which I get, which is, wow, we're being visited by beings from the universe. This is huge. We need to rethink our history and everything. And I get that. I totally think we do. But the problem is that there's an actor in our space that might want to use those openings for their purposes. What better opportunity to say, we're from here, we authored you, we are the gods, we are the angels, we are the ones who wrote your scriptures, and we've come back. And here we're opening up those channels wide-eyed with no critical thinking. I mean, that's you want to talk vulnerability, that's off the charts.
Yes, and I'd love to continue that conversation with you, Reed, right after the break. We have Reed Summers here dropping jewels different way of thinking, different way. Maybe you should adopt some of this logical thinking when it comes to phenomena. We're going to be getting into some of your questions and a lot more on the back half of this hour 2 right here, Spaced Out Radio. You guys don't go anywhere. All right, clear. All right, man, we're already here, already at the end of the conversation, man. Oh man, and it's just like you said, it's just so many ways we can go. So I would love to have this conversation more. I think you should be heard more with this perspective. Because I'm a nuts like I'm a logic based person as well, and like I said earlier, I think common sense solves a lot or answers a lot of these questions, at least with the thought experiments like you mentioned here. And it's just good to have these sort of conversations when trying to figure this thing out. You're right, this should be the type of conversations they're having in Congress and all over the place, anywhere that they're approaching this. And I think I like the equations, that equation aspect as well. I mean, that just makes a lot of sense. So you're dropping some gems here for us, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Tried and true. I mean, these are the known knowns. These are our assets. This is the knowledge we've built up as a species. We should use it.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess I'll ask you this when we get off break, but we'll talk about the controlled disclosure versus catastrophic disclosure, because I would love to see what you think about that.
Yeah.
Let me say hi to a few people. Richard Minnick, thanks for coming in. Ross Lambda, thanks for coming in. I see you out there. Angels Are Life. Nikki, I see you as well. Damian Wyatt, Kevin Kennedy, TMI. Let's see who else has come in. Super Crazy Movie Geek. Dogface is here. Kenzo. Hey, Kenzo. Kurt W75. Glad to see you showed up tonight. Jerry Carter, thanks for coming in. Paul Naman, yes, I can't believe you're here. Thanks for coming, sir. Eve, hey Eve, thanks for coming. Hayo Young, thanks for coming on in. Cat Tongue 96, thanks for coming on in. LVL Dr. Love, thanks for coming on in tonight. Big Bird, thanks for coming in. Zoo. I'm just gonna assume that's how you say it. I'm probably wrong, but thanks for coming on in tonight. Appreciate you showing up. Renee La Riviere, thanks for showing up tonight at the After Hours radio show. We appreciate you. Let's see who else is showing up here. Susan Place, thanks for coming on in. Leslie Light Kesta, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you showing up. Abbott Hoffman, I see you, Abbott. Thanks for coming on in. Rosa Muratori, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you showing up. And for anybody who might be here new for the first time tonight, we do this thing here 7 days a week, just so you know. This is the After Hours radio show. We run this Saturdays and Sundays, 8 p.m. Pacific until 11 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday. Then you got Dave Scott running the Woo Train Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. until midnight. And we have Lee and Jax doing the show Fridays from 8 p.m. Pacific till 9 p.m. So, point being is there's 7 days a week. You can come here to Space Out Radio and find some really awesome content. I see you guys are definitely putting questions in there, and I appreciate you. But yeah, consider hitting that subscribe button if you're here for the first time. We'd appreciate seeing you back. So, let me see. Make sure I didn't miss anyone here. Okay, there's another question. Gotcha. All right, we're looking good. Dewey Cheatham and how? Okay, you just came in. I seen you show up. Thanks for coming on in. Rain C, I see you as well. Yeah, thanks for coming in. Rain C. Yeah, we are looking good. Let me check the questions here. And also, Wes Decker, appreciate your awesome support of Spaced Out Radio. Didn't get to tell you earlier. Another engaging conversation and fantastic guest. Great job, Mr. Rob G. Yeah, we only want the people to move the needle, and definitely Reed is one that does that. So we're just glad to have him here, guys. Show your love. Let's see. Yeah, I see your questions here, Super Crazy Movie Geek. Let's see. Ooh. Okay. All right, we're looking good, guys. We got about 30 seconds here before we come back. Okay, I'll ask that as well. You got a lot of questions, Super Crazy Movie Geek. Good. Let's see. Kurt W75 just says, thank you for your time, Reed. Good talk, brother.
Thank you.
All right. 10 seconds, guys. Let's get ready to go. All right, everybody. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio. We're on the backside of hour number 2 with our guest, Reed Summers here, getting into some stuff that people consider controversial. Just talking this thing through, right? Let's look at all logical options. Loving the equations. We had a great talk. If you missed any of this interview, make sure you jump into our archives. They're absolutely free. YouTube.com/@SpacedOutRadio. We have a plethora of shows and information you can get into as we go ahead and jump right back into the conversation here with Reed. Reed, I did want to ask you, there's terms floating around, catastrophic disclosure versus controlled disclosure. I'll just tell you my understanding or how I look at that, right? I think controlled disclosure is the government's attempt to slow drip the information, maybe drag it out for another 25, 50, 80 years. And I think the reasoning for that, now obviously could be wrong, but it seems like they just want to make sure that they figure out how to maintain power structure on the opposite side of their disclosure. Then you have catastrophic disclosure, which is ETs can show up tomorrow and this thing is out the bag and everybody knows what's going on. Which one of the two do you go with, controlled or catastrophic disclosure?
Well, first and foremost, I advocate accurate disclosure because I think the risk of a false disclosure is very real, either by human actors, whether this government or another foreign government, or by the NHI themselves. When you look into the abduction phenomenon, it appears abductees have been specifically groomed to perform functions during some sort of grand event, some unveiling of NHI presence. And that's concerning to me. I don't think we're equipped to discern the authenticity, the veracity of that kind of disclosure, and the potential for it to be incorrect, misleading, partially correct, partially incorrect is just phenomenal. And we have not even taken the time to assess the possible scenarios of intent that could be behind such a disclosure. So I worry about a future NHI appearance that basically utilizes an extensive network of apologists and supporters and believers to promote wide open acceptance of these entities and the acceptance of whatever technology they may grant, which may be impressive, but it might be a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
There are few logical pathways that you can imagine where we could imbibe or ingest a non-human technology into our current global system without it causing conflict, academic, scientific, political, etc. So I'm concerned about that. I support disclosure, absolutely. I think the people need to be on the side of whatever the whole human response is to this visitation. I think the population at large holds the fuller record of the NHI's interface with the human species. I don't think government can do this all on its own, whether that's to fight it or interface with it. I think the people are needed. And so I'm a huge advocate for disclosure. it is my understanding that the NHI are not advocates for disclosure. They do not want disclosure. Now, why would they not want disclosure? And would that not cause us to be a bit cautious in making assumptions, right? So, I think it'll be very important to see in the next 2 to 3 years who wants disclosure and who doesn't, because the world needs it. The bad actor in the world definitely does not want it. Who's working with the bad actor? Where have they embedded themselves? With what world powers? Could be with multiple world powers. There could also be multiple bad actors. So I think disclosure is something to support. Obviously, it can't all be everything yesterday. Damn it, right? We have to be a little bit more mature. We can't be childish and just say we want it all now. It's like, this is not small ball disclosure. This is big ball disclosure. This is powerful enough to start a world war.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if a major regional conflict goes hand in hand with this event. So I think it's that scale of an event. And so caution and intelligent rollout are due. I don't think necessarily the human actors who would disclose will necessarily disclose it accurately either. And again, national security interests will be woven in, right? It's not going to be as clean as clean as can be. It's going to be complex and messy, unfortunately. But yeah, I am in support of it. I understand there are reasons to not disclose. I don't think those are reasons to not disclose. Those are not my reasons. I think there are reasons for a more careful rollout, a progressive rollout, and also to prepare people really for an accurate understanding. Because again, we have to ask, what is it that's going to be disclosed? I rarely hear people talking about this. We want the truth. What truth? Whose truth? What level of truth? And the government is not going to pony up everything they've done, everything they've gained, right? That's not what governments do. That's not what humans do. So we can't expect angelic behavior on behalf of our fellow humankind. If part of the disclosure is that we are facing, among other phenomena, a physical alien who is not indigenous to this world, that's enormous. And the mechanisms have to be in place for global society to process that event for beneficial outcomes. I mean, that's what I'm all for. I want human survival and advancement. I want a unified human response, a whole species response to contact. And I want detrimental activity in the human space to end. So those are big goals, lofty, maybe unaccomplishable, but something to reach for.
And I like that. What you stated about just, are you ready to hear why they're here? Like, are you ready to hear that? And that's, I think, one of the biggest things is just expect to maybe hear what you never thought that it could be. Think it could be the whole opposite side of what you've been thinking this whole time. And then I like the experiencers or abductees maybe being used as or fed false information or just being used as misinformation agents to kind of spread that story to the public. Just looking at that and thinking about that, like, that would be super effective in creating a false narrative across humanity. That would be wow.
Yeah, I mean, and many people could be used who are not abductees, or not even contactees. These manipulative tactics work on many levels. I'll just note, often people say, "Oh, you're just focused on the bad side. You don't know about the good side," I am focused on the detrimental actor. I think that demands our attention and our response first and foremost. That does not rule out everything else, but I'm also cautious about making assumptions about how a beneficial would be able to benefit us, right? Because in all of these channeled alien messages about a beneficial visitation and, do they describe how they will help the world without causing war and having to annihilate the part of the human population that resists receiving what they want to do? Right. How they would not have to take up a position of habitation in this planet to enact these policies? Like, do they describe that? Because if not, it's an implausible message. They're making massive promises with no coherent plan as to how that effect would come into the world. And often these messages talk about, well, first this evil force in the world, or this bad, Illuminati force, government force has to be removed. Oh, removed. So we're talking about removing people violently, I presume. I mean, come on now. So we have to mature in our response to these potential messages. They are potentially messages. They may not be accurate, is the thing. How do we determine if they are accurate? I think to some degree we can. We have to engage those capabilities. To some degree we can't. And, there is a scenario where we basically say, you know what, time out, remove and reset. We need all non-human entities to remove themselves physically from the world so that we can form the necessary treaties, governing bodies, agreements between nation states about how to collectively engage, and then we will re-engage. Now, if a non-human entity is unwilling to do that, that's a flag. That means they've already taken up a position, they have an interest and a stake, and they are not willing to give us the space as a species to formulate our plan, our intent for engaging life beyond our world. So, these are some of the things that we're going to be running up against in the next few years as more comes out about this force and what it's done and what government has done with it. It's going to be messy, but it's going to provoke these kinds of conversations. Be very important.
Love it, man. I love that state of thinking there, man. It's just real. It's real talk there, and I really appreciate it.
I'm just thinking like every person can think, really. I mean, I'm not an academic. I don't work in government.
See, the thing is, there's a battle between, like the way you broken it down, there's a battle because you want to trust an experiencer. And so you listen to the stories of an experiencer, but they're just telling what they've been told. They haven't fleshed it out on a level that we're talking about here, which I think is a very important tool now for experiencers and other people who receive messages from these extraterrestrials to go into have this different sort of logical thinking on what's being told to them before they relay that information to someone else. And that's just an awesome thing. But it does concern me on this level. And I'll ask you this before we get to audience questions, because I had thought about, okay, the way that these extraterrestrials interact, and they've been seen in many cases visiting schools and contacting children, right? So now with this sort of thinking, if you're processing it in this way, that doesn't seem actually like a great thing to be happening at this point. It's threatening almost. Yeah.
I mean, it could be. There's the possibility of threat is undeniable. So anyone who says it's impossible, they're not credible. What degree of threat we need to determine. Yes, but until we do, these unsanctioned engagements with human beings are concerning at the minimum, and in some cases alarming. You asked me earlier, do I feel, cautious, or am I more reserved in how I go out into the world? Well, take a look at the missing persons, missing 411 connection, David Paulides. Think about that before you go camping in nature. I do, right? I mean, because that's the environment we're in. It's almost like you go out on the internet and you go to websites and there's all these ads and click here and download this. And if you don't understand the environment you're in, you're going to get hacked, right? You're going to download something. They're going to extract your data. They're going to hold you hostage for money, etc. Like, that's the environment digitally. We need to understand the Earth-based environment now. And if we are not counting NHI at all, or we're thinking they're neutral or simply in an observational stance remote from our planet, think again. That's not the case. I don't think we need to be in a state of fear about it, but caution and concern, absolutely. And I think we need to get down the road of understanding the true NHI human interface as it has historically occurred.
And I've said that exactly. I'm glad you explained it that way, because I've said, yeah, okay, would I take that trip through the desert? I probably still would, but it'd be good to have the information prior to me making the decision, right? I at least should have the information so I can make an educated decision on if I'm gonna go. There may be some risk involved in it. Okay, I may be willing to accept that and still take the trip. And same thing with people going out to the forest, because you have Bigfoot and other things. I'm just like, okay, it'd be good for people to know, hey, there's the risk of that. And then, hey, you can still choose to go, but at least have that, because some people may choose to say, you know what, I'm not, it's not worth it. I'm not going to go. right? And just at least having that choice there. So I appreciate that, man. As we jump into, we got a few questions here. I got Super Crazy Movie Geek asking you, do you think humans could defeat a malevolent higher intelligence like in Independence Day?
Well, there's a thought experiment I don't entertain very often. I don't think this is anything like Independence Day. Again, I think this missiles and mayhem kind of human framing of a malevolent or hostile presence is just not it's not what's happening, right? But that does not reverse conclude that they're here for our benefit. So we have to go to what we can observe. So, like, if I may frame it in that light, Lou Elizondo, he talks about the 5 observables of UAP. Well, one thing I'm talking about is the 5 observables of NHI. I think we need to go a little bit deeper beyond the shiny thing in the sky to look at the complete kind of force composition in our world, and what are they doing that we can observe. Secrecy and covert operation, number 1. Non-disclosure of intent, number 2. Divisive engagements, for example, with defense entities around the world. 4, non-consensual contact, non-free will based contact with individuals. And then 5, psychic manipulation. Okay, so 5 observables. So to go to the question, do you think humans could defeat that? Absolutely, easily. I mean, we are numerically superior to exponential levels than them, I would presume. I don't think there are 7.5 billion of them here.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
we control the ground, right? They may control the sky temporarily, but a little bit of human awareness, eyes on the sky, iPhones pointed up, right? Governments with the permission to do things that they could not otherwise do in a state of public ignorance, right? To potentially obstruct the operation of these craft in the sky. This is going to change the operating conditions, which presently favor any force of any intent, but most certainly one of a detrimental intent. So this kind of like frontiersman reality that we have that benefits their covert operation, I think that needs to end. We cannot have covert operation by undisclosed, unidentified entities who are interacting with individual human beings in unsanctioned ways. You just think about it, folks. I mean, think like the human being that you are. If we allow that to happen for another 80 years, we might not be the same human species. This matters. So I think, can we fight it? I don't even know if fighting it is what we would do. I think awareness and attention, change the operating conditions, have the conversations globally, and require NHI to abide by our rules of engagement. That looks within our grasp.
I like that. And Kim Jellin, to go off the 80-year thing there, Kim Jellin asks, Reed seems the only 80 years of NHI. Why?
Oh, great question. So yeah, I mean, we get into the ancient contact and, the possibility of perpetual contact. I do not believe that we are being contacted for the very first time in the last 80 years. I think there is a qualitative and quantitatively distinct visitation taking place in the 20th century. I think contact likely happened at other points in time, maybe for millions of years, right? But we do not see in the historical record evidence of a visitation like this, engaging with people like this. And as you go back into ancient history, the veracity of the records declines, the number of them declines, the utility of them declines. I mean, there's one thing about looking at a biblical passage and wondering about it. There's another thing about detecting craft in the neighborhoods of American cities. So we actually have capabilities to detect that. We don't have great capabilities to know what was said on a mountaintop 2,000 years ago by one entity to another. So it's not that it didn't happen, it's that the utility is lower. And fundamentally, we have to deal with the force that's here. I think there will be time over time to consider all possibilities regarding, again, origins, etc. But there are too many vulnerabilities to open up that aperture all the way and allow potential NHI narratives to pass right in. Because look, all they need to say, all they need to do is make an undeniable physical presence in the world that can, captured, seen by thousands or millions of people, captured on video, photo, sensor data, etc. It's undeniable. They're here. and say the following thing: we are the gods in your scriptures. We are the angels who have come in the past, and we have come again. Now, they say that. What percentage of humanity believes it instantly? A pretty sizable slice. Is that a problem? Potentially. Can we verify the claim that they just made going back to the Bible or other scriptures or cave art? No, we cannot. And so it's unverifiable. And it demands our immediate acceptance. And many people would give that over. And so, look at the variables at play here. It's a high vulnerability, high consequence situation. But yes, I think in time we will need to understand the true history of non-human interactions with our world. I do look at the cryptoterrestrial theory, the ultra-terrestrial theory, extratemporal, future humans, all of that. So I'm not in a state of saying that's all wrong. I am saying I believe, after everything I've looked at, that there is an extraterrestrial, non-human force present in our world. And interdimensionality, fascinating, theoretical. And if we're going to start claiming that those in our world today, all of them, are theoretical beings from a theoretical space, when there is physical craft, there are biologics, there are humanoid encounters. I mean, come on, folks. It's like we have to deal with what we can deal with and not escape dealing with it and avoid confronting or contending with the reality of it and escape into the theoretical fringes of all possibilities. Is there a transdimensional component to them or their capability? That's different. Both of those, being and capability, I think possibly, yes. Are they still in our dimension, having physical effects on people? Yes. So we still have to deal with it in our dimension. And so, ultimately, we need a response framework more than an understanding framework. The scientific method, beautiful, the gold standard. Data is God, right? But ultimately, we have to respond. And so we might need more of an intelligence framework to do that. And here's where I like the phrase reconnaissance, which is science in service to reconnaissance. Like, we need science to help us know what to do on appropriate timescales and at appropriate levels of human action, global action. But to get back to the question, I do think this is a unique event in the history of our civilization. It is a 20th century visitation. I don't doubt that the long tail of that curve goes way into the 1800s, 1700s, 1500s, and beyond. I don't doubt that at all. I think the observation could be many hundreds of years running, but the intervention is not. The intervention is 20th century. And I think we should look at what happened in the 20th century, because understanding that is indicative of why they might have been motivated to come.
Awesome answer there. And I have you pretty much answered Jay Truth Seeker's question. I'll just bring it up because he put it in there. He said, do you think a UFO disclosure could reveal and bring about the real truth of religious origins? And you touched on that. So I'll move to the next question, which is Angels Are Life. Nikki saying, so what are your view of hybrids, human ET hybrids? And we got about 1 minute left.
1 minute to talk about hybrids. Wow. Here's my elevator pitch. I almost shook hands with Donald Rumsfeld and asked him in person once. So here's my elevator pitch from 20 years later. I think there is strong indications that there is a human hybridization program. I think the abduction phenomenon is connected to it. I think it makes sense for them to come and use the infrastructure and the genetic infrastructure that we humans have developed for their ends. Makes total sense. Why bring it all here when it's already here and can be used to develop what they need? Maybe they need a specific type of human with psychic abilities and allegiance to non-human interests to operate or function in some role.
Okay. I want to make sure that you get to tell everybody where they could find you, because we'll have to go right in the commercial. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yep. You can find me, reedsummers.com. You can find me on Twitter, reedsummers7. Working on a book, working on launching my own show as well. So stay tuned, and I hope to unpack all of this extensively and have more of these conversations. So thank you.
Reed, I appreciate you coming in, man. I knew this would be awesome. I knew it'd probably go over 2 hours. I would definitely love to reach back out to you and continue the conversation. We can actually even take it different paths. I think you're an asset to the overall conversation, so we got to do this again.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you hosting it. There's got to be a host for the conversation to happen.
Appreciate that. Everybody, thanks for your questions. This has been Reed Summers giving us some awesome information. You guys don't go anywhere. We're going to be jumping into hour number 3 as we go into the debrief of this conversation. Reed, you have a good rest of your night.
Conversations that move the needle.
You're listening to